And there are those who demand that pop music is nothing but the grotesque mumblings of a drug-sodden youth. Others, that it is making possible the most startling artistic upheaval since the Renaissance. Others still, that it is merely the harmless entertainment of adolescence. Everyone, however, demands the existence of heroes.
In 1964, The Who emerged from the clubs of West London to become one of the most influential and controversial acts of the 1960s.
It was breaking the mold of what happened before. Everybody prior to that was kind of polite. The Who were not polite.
They were the sort of right combination of sort of competent performance and inventiveness, with that sort of tinge of madness about it.
Between 1964 and 1968, the band would release a series of revolutionary singles that would change the face of modern music. This programme is an examination of these records, their musical significance and the bands who made them. The Who formed in West London at Acton Grammar School, where John Entwistle, Pete Townshend and Roger Daltrey all attended. Coming together initially as the Detours, the group quickly formed around Pete on guitar, John on bass and Roger on vocals, with the slightly older Doug Sandon behind the drum kit. Playing various small venues around Shepherd's Bush, the group began by covering popular American rhythm and blues acts.
Well, The Who at the time were doing what a lot of bands were doing at the time, which was R&B covers. They were doing James Brown, Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King, Bo Diddley. That's what the base is for, thousands of groups was in the early 60s in Britain.
You know you make me want to shout. Oh yeah, you gon' shout. Oh yeah, you gon' shout.
There was more of a move towards the harder-edged electric R&B, and that may have come about through influence by bands like Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated, who really were the first R&B band in the UK. Back to The Who, or the Detours as they were called then, they had this rather confused battery of images. There was all this like a melting pot, really, and a tremendous excitement of discovery. And all of that kind of invested itself in The Who's influences in their music.
That's what the standard was. R&B was what every group in Britain played. That's what you cut your teeth on. And the Who were doing that, just like 1,000 other groups were doing.
The next significant influence on the band's sound was to come in the form of an early manager, Pete Meaden. Meaden had long since been at the forefront of a growing youth movement that became known as mod.
Well, Pete brought mod culture to the band. He brought this huge blanket and he draped it over them, and he immersed them in mod culture. He played them all the records that they should be listening to. He took them to Carnaby Street and to clothes shops to get dressed in a certain way. And he just immersed them in mod culture. He turned them into a mod band. I mean, the thing about The Who is they were a band who became mods, as opposed to someone like the Small Faces, who were mods who became a band.
The Who were made into a mod band by Pete Meaden, obviously. I mean, they weren't a mod band as such. And he was quite, smart to spot that, really, and turn them into, give that crowd their own band, and he pushed that very hard.
The one guy who really took to all this was Townshend. Townshend had come from art school, so he was really open to kind of any new artistic directions, new artistic ways. And also what happened was him and Richard Barnes, who was a very close friend of his, were sharing a flat, and the guy they were sharing the flat with had this huge record collection, had to get out of town for whatever reason, and suddenly they were left with this amazing record collection of blues and R&B. And so they just immersed themselves in that. So you had Meaden, you had this record collection, you had this developing mod culture, and so it was natural for the Who to kind of start, you know, positioning themselves as the voice of this subculture.
Although the Who had found their place amongst youth culture, there were problems forming within the group itself. Friction had developed between Doug Sandon and the rest of the band.
They needed a much more powerful drummer, somebody who could respond to the increasingly exciting lead guitar work and much more energetic vocals. Everybody else was putting a lot of power and energy into the band, but the drummer was actually 10 years older than the rest of them, and probably played adequately and well, but in a kind of routine style, and they needed that push. So I think after a row between Roger and Doug, the drummer quit, or was fired, and that left them needing, obviously they had gigs lined up, so they went through quite a few different drummers for a while. And one night they were playing somewhere, a gig in West London, and somebody showed up and said, "Oh, you should get my mate to try out. He's a much better drummer than the bloke you've got." My mate's name's Keith Moon. So Keith Moon showed up, leapt on stage and took over the drum kit and wrecked it, probably knocked it to hell, because Keith's mode of playing the drums was to play with full power and attack, rather like Gene Krupa, who was one of his early idols. I think everybody realised that they'd found the man for the Who.
Trying to sum up Keith Moon's drumming in a couple of sentences is pretty much impossible. He was a mould breaker, a pioneer. There's really been nobody like him. The way he played drums was absolutely reflective of his personality. He was mischievous, lovable, off the wall, unhinged.
With Keith installed behind the drum kit, Pete Meaden completed the band's mod image by changing the group's name to the High Numbers. Soon after, the band signed a one-single deal with Fontana. The record they were to release was the Meaden-penned I'm the Face.
The single that Pete Meaden wrote for the Who, I'm the Face and Zoot Suit, he actually nicked from two R&B records, one by Slim Harpo, called Got Love If You Want It, and one by the Showmen. Again, another signal to the audience, you know, taking these records, changing them around a little bit, giving them lyrics, you know. I'm the Face. The Face was a mod term for the guy who was number one. He was the leader. The Face was the guy with the best clothes, the best ideas.
Like most of the British groups of the early 60s, the Who were heavily influenced by American R&B music. Many of the soul bands at that time, and particularly Booker T and the MGs. They used simple three-chord arrangements. The difference for the British artists was the guitar was more up front. You can hear this actually in I'm the Face, when the Who was still called the High Numbers as their first single, where they used a simple R&B backing, but the guitar and the bass are propelling the song along, whereas in American artists would have used horns, or they would have used an organ, you know, to do the same thing. I'll show you that part just now.
If you want it, dear. All the others are third-class tickets by me, baby, is that clear?
You can hear Roger Daltrey's voice very clearly and very... right from the start, he has a distinctive style, distinctive vocal style. You couldn't mistake him for anybody else. And I think Pete Townshend was in more of a jazz mode at that point, so his guitar solo isn't into power chords, it's much more linear, straight ahead kind of guitar playing. I think Pete himself was quite amused years later when he heard himself playing in that style.
Despite the mod appeal of I'm the Face, the single failed to chart, and the High Numbers soon found themselves once again without a record deal. However, the group's fortunes were about to change when two young filmmakers, Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp, attended a performance at the Railway Hotel in the autumn of 1964. Kit,
of course, was looking for a band to make a film about. He had formed unlikely partnership with Chris Stamp. The two people were quite poles apart as personalities. Kit was kind of languid and incredibly well-spoken, very well-educated, former public schoolboy, Oxford University, British Army, and there was Chris Stamp, who was the son of a tugboat driver. But together, they both worked in films. They'd both been assistant film directors together in the early 60s. When they saw them playing, the reaction of the crowd was so intense. They realised that this was a group they not only wanted to make a film about, but they'd actually manage them and promote them and get them a record deal. Because there were several important first steps they had to take. One of them, unfortunately for Peter Meaden, was that it meant them taking over as managers.
So they have to get rid of the manager, which is Pete Meaden. So they take him out for a lunch. And they're ready to offer him up to $5,000 to take the band off his hands. And they sit down and they go, well, look, we'll give you 500 quid. And Meaden goes, all right then. And he takes 500 quid, thus saving them £4,500.
Moving into offices in Ivor Court, Lambert and Stamp began to manage the group. One of their first decisions was to change their name back to The Who. During a gig in Soho, Pete accidentally damaged his guitar and thus inadvertently created one of The Who's trademarks.
Apparently one night at the Mark he accidentally damaged his guitar through some flamboyant gesture, and he capitalised on it. You know, in for a penny, in for a pound. If you're going to sort of break a guitar, want to really break it. Don't just sort of knock off a machine head or break a string. And Keith Moon saw this going on and, decided to sort of support his colleague by sort of walking through his drum kit, and breaking it. And from then on, this kept happening.
And I think part of this was showmanship, and part of it was real. Whereas bands later on saw it as no more than presentation of a show. Part of what The Who were doing was very much, we hate this, and you know what, we're so pent up, we're so frustrated and so angry, and we've got so much energy coming out of us. This is the only way we can feel it. This is the only way we can do it. So I think they ended up initially trashing instruments as a way of ending a show because it's the only way they could.
Pete used to say, or used to imply, that their strategy of smashing up their equipment was in the same artistic line as Gustav Metzger, who was a great pioneer of auto-destruction in art.
That idea of auto-destruction mirrored the violence that I was talking about earlier that was going out on London streets. London was a very rough place, 65, 66, 67. And you had a lot of violence going on, and that mirrored, again, that kind of idea of youth frustration and anger, that, things are so bad, you smash your guitar up. And it's great to go forward on the album Live at Leeds, which came out in '71, I think it was, where you get these documents about The Who's early days, and you see their, the receipts for gigs, which go something like, received from gig, £200, destruction of equipment, £950, I mean, they were continually in debt, The Who. For the whole, until Tommy, that group was seriously in debt.
As their stage shows became more intense, the band embarked upon a 16-week residency at the Marquee Club in Soho. As their popularity continued to grow, they attracted the attention of a young producer, Shel Tormey.
I became aware of The Who because I'd had hits with the Kinks. I'd done Really Got Me by that time and a couple of others. And I had a girl working for me part-time who was friendly with The Who management, and they asked her to ask me to come and see the band, specifically because I had done the Kinks and I thought I was the right guy to do The Who. So, in fact, I went and saw the band. They were playing at a church hall in a rehearsal room, and it took, I would guess, maybe about 30 to 45 seconds before I thought, this is a really great band. This is the first really hard rock and roll band I've heard in England. So I said, absolutely, I'd like to sign you guys, which I did to my own company, but then funded all the various records and eventually made a deal for them, which was then American Decca, now MCA or Universal, because nobody in England would listen.
Signing with American Decca meant that The Who would be released in the UK under the subsidiary label of Brunswick. With the group finally signed, they went into Pi Studios in January 1965 to record what would become their first hit single, I Can't Explain.
The first record I did with them was I Can't Explain, which Pete specifically wrote for a single, which I believe he wrote it thinking that it sounded like something I had done with the Kinks, and was following a trend that was happening at the time. And in any event, the demo I heard was about 1 minute and 10 seconds. So I worked with him and the band on expanding that into at least another minute, I believe. I can't remember exactly how long it is, but it's not real long. I did it at Pi Studios number 2 studio, which is in fact the same studio I used to record the Kinks at. At the time, they really weren't doing backing vocals, so I hired the Ivy League, who were 3 guys who were a band in their own right, of course. They did have a hit or two, and were extremely good backing band as the backing vocalist. I also hired Jimmy Page as a backup, a rhythm guitarist. There was only really Pete playing guitar. So I had Jimmy there playing rhythm guitar, and that's really about it. It didn't take a whole lot of time to do the record. I think we probably nailed it in about 5 or 6 takes, I would think.
From the moment that I Can't Explain starts with Townshend's guitar intro, clipped guitar chords, kind of sets out the stall for his guitar playing really kind of throughout his career. The consummate rhythm guitar player. It's a lovely sound, it's kind of aggressive without being overbearing, and then you kick into a track that's 2 minutes long. Again, sets out the stall for Townshend's writing early on. It epitomises the kind of power pop that he was so good at.
When I Can't Explain came out, their second release particularly, it was a Pete Townshend composition, and they felt comfortable with it. You can actually hear it now and you feel like, this is The Who. They're no longer the High Numbers, they're no longer a band looking for a way forward. This is The Who. And part of the reason is because immediately Pete Townshend was identifying with a lot of what was going on at street level. It was about a kid who found it very difficult to talk about his love for a girl. I can't explain to you why I love you, which is particularly the basis of the whole song. So it's something that teenagers could actually identify with.
I Can't Explain was released on January 1965. However, it was not to become an instant chart success. It wasn't until the band appeared on the television show Ready, Steady, Go that the single reached the top 10.
What's very important in the development of most of these groups at that time was the advent of a TV show called Ready, Steady, Go, which started broadcasting in 1963. Ready, Steady, Go was a pop show which used mods, mainly mods, as its audience. What they would do is they would film on a Friday, and on a Tuesday night they would go around all the clubs in London and get the best dancers and the best dressed young people, and they would invite them down to Holborn Kingsway Studios on a Friday and put them into the audience. But what Ready Steady Go also did, obviously, was to broadcast nationwide groups such as The Who, you know, to take them out of the Goldhawk Social Club and present them to the rest of the country.
Ready Steady Go made The Who. Ready Steady Go was probably the most atmospheric pop series of the 60s. And when The Who appeared on Ready Steady Go, I mean, a lot of the viewers had never seen anything like it. The Who became very much the kind of resident band on Ready Steady Go almost. You know, every time they had a new single out, they were guaranteed a lot of coverage on that.
With I Can't Explain eventually reaching number 8 in the charts, the band went back into the studio with Shel Talmy to record Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere.
Anyway, Anyhow, Anytime, followed up from I Can't Explain, was very different. It was a far more confident, strident Who. And one of the things Pete Townshend said was, this is anti-parents, this is anti-class, this is anti-everything. So once they'd established a certain personal problem in terms of dealing with girls, which I think every teenage boy, almost every teenage boy goes through at that period, they then went the whole hog and said, right, scrap everything. We hate everything, we hate the world, we're standing up for what we believe in, and what we believe in is the fact that we hate everything. And again, it was something that people readily identified with, and as the third Who release, it was a way of saying, right, we have the two motifs. We have the personal indifference and the personal lack of confidence, but we also have a far more open lack of awareness of what previous generations have done. We don't care. We're moving on. This is the new generation, the blank generation. This is, for want of a better description, my generation.
Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere was, I still believe, the first record that got into the charts where there was controlled feedback as part of the sound. We went for it specifically. That's Pete was working with controlled feedback. The challenge at that point was trying to record it because it was, I said, the equipment was primitive by today's standards. And an aside, a funny aside perhaps to this is, when I finished the record, I sent it in to American Decca as the next single. And I got a telegram back, because of course there was no email or anything else at that point, saying, we think you sent us the wrong tape. There's all these strange noises on it. And I had to wire back and say, really, that's the way it's supposed to be, honest. You know, Honest Engine put it out like that.
Pete Townshend was the first guitarist to use feedback as a sound effect to enhance a song, to enhance the power of a song. A few bands of the 60s had tried it before. The Beatles had used it on I Feel Fine. The Kinks had experimented with it as well. Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, all sorts of bands had tried it. But they never used it as a feature of a song, actually used it as a solo, almost. And how he did this, basically, was he used the guitar almost like a weapon. He would shake it, he would drag his plectrum along the strings, he would hold the guitar against the speaker of his amplifier, and the guitar would feedback violently, you know, very loud. But then he came up with this idea to switch between the feedback sound and silence.
Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere became another chart success, and as the group's popularity began to grow, they prepared for what would become their most successful single so far. However, relationships within the band were beginning to unravel.
Despite all the best efforts of the management, and despite the fact they had a very innovative, original and exciting concept on their hands, there was trouble brewing. There was undercurrents within the band which kind of threatened its very existence. There was a fear that the Who might implode. And what was the cause of the problem, really, was a kind of power struggle between Townshend and Daltrey, because the band had obviously, as we remember, started out as the Detours. It was Roger's baby originally. It's his group. And of course, people didn't realise that when the Who became famous and were having hit singles and appearing regularly on TV, and people tended to see Pete as the leader already because he was the songwriter. So occasionally I think Roger kind of reverted back to his street fighting roots, really. I think it reached the point where the band and the management were saying, well, for God's sake, if Roger's going to carry on like this, you know, every time we have a row, he's going to hit out, maybe we better fire the singer. It seemed unbelievable. And in fact, when Melody Maker and other music papers reported this kind of split and the possibility that the group might actually break up because Roger had been fired, there were screams of panic, of course, and the management rushed into print to say it was all nonsense and lies, but in fact I think Roger had actually been fired at one point. The group was on the verge of splitting up, despite all the denials. And then I think Roger went away. I think he slept in his own car for a while, and he went through a bit of a crisis. He went off to mull over what was happening, and he thought about it. He thought, do I really want to give away this group, even if it means coming to an accommodation with the other guys, and realising it was a team, and that it was his best bet, really, in life, because whatever he did afterwards, it would never have the same impact or excitement as The Who.
With the band reunited, the single My Generation was released on November the 27th, 1965, and has since become an anthem for the 1960s and youth rebellion.
What made My Generation one of the classics of the 60s and a so-called anthem? A very good question. I think in some ways the lyrics sort of reflected what the rebellious times were all about. We were all coming out of periods of post-war and post-depression, and there was a whole group of kids, me included, who were looking to do something new, and that's everything we did was really breaking the mold, because nothing had really existed of what we were trying to do before we did it. So I think this is, again, one of those songs. It expressed the feelings of the time.
Roger Daltrey stutters on the words because that's his way of expressing the inarticulateness of youth. This is why he's stuttering, because and there's also an idea that he's blocked, that he's on pills. So when you're on pills, you do tend to stutter, apparently so.
One of the most interesting aspects of the tune, obviously, and the most high profile is Entwistle's bass solo, which again kind of sums up the essence of The Who, in as much as it's not rambling, it's not particularly egotistical and attention seeking. It does what it seeks to do. It punctuates the song.
My Generation, more than any of the other songs, certainly of that period, defines The Who. It almost defines that generation. People tried to put us down talking about My Generation. There was a feeling of sort of, we're the kids, we're the new generation, we don't care what's gone before. We've grown up with rock and roll, we're taking it a step further. And of course it has one of the great lines, possibly the greatest line, or the most celebrated line that whoever wrote, I hope I die before I get old. At the time, I think it was a great statement about the way a lot of kids felt was, I'm not going to be old. I want to actually be exactly who I am. I want to be excited by the world, and if I can't be, that's why I want to die. And I think there was a certain misinterpretation of what Daltrey was saying, or what Townshend was saying, which wasn't, I'm going to kill myself before I'm 30. It was, if I ever lose the useful exuberance, if I ever become bored and stale with life, I don't want to live.
With 3 hit singles behind the group, they began to prepare for the release of their first LP, also named My Generation.
What's memorable about recording the My Generation album was just the fact that we were doing songs we wanted to do. I think all of us were having a good time. I certainly was, and it was great to hear what the results were. This was, for the time, a unique record. I think that is one of the things that really stand out.
The first album wasn't a huge success in artistic terms, I don't think. It was the start of Townshend's songwriting. I think probably my favourite track on it personally was The Kids Are All Right. I think that was actually better than My Generation.
The guy's dancing with my girl. That's fine. I know them all pretty well. But I know sometimes I must get out in the line. Better leave her behind when the kids are all right. The kids are all right.
The Kids Are All Right is one of my favourite of the early singles. It's really upbeat, really optimistic, anthemic, kind of celebration of the culture that and the background that the Who were coming out of. The whole mod thing, which they weren't necessarily kind of completely in line with, but definitely kind of shaped their early experiences as a band. And it's just really an energetic kind of declaration of the love of being part of a gang, part of something that was going on, a movement.
What the Kids Are All Right had was almost a surfing type of sound. It was very melodic and very anthemic and very simple in terms of its music. But also what Townshend was saying in the lyrics was, you know what, whatever other people think, you lot are okay because you're doing what you want to do, and don't let anybody tell you any differently, because everybody else in previous times has had the opportunity to do what they want to do. If they blew it, tough, their problem. Just carry on doing it the way you want to do it. And he did it in a very simple, straightforward song. It didn't last a long time, but the melody remains with you. And then you hear the lyrics on top of that. And it's a great anthem of the time.
The kids are all right.
The release of My Generation marked the band's final outing with Shell Torme. Due in part to financial difficulties, the group decided to break their contract with Torme and Decca and instead signed to Reaction Records.
My relationship came to an end with the band when the management, one guy in particular, decided that A, I was having too much influence with his boys, and secondly, that everything that I had done with the band, they could do without me. And at which point I coined a phrase that there's nothing that a band won't do for you before they're hit or less afterwards, and I think that kind of applied.
To usher in the new era, The Who chose Substitute to be their first single release on their new label.
Substitute was a kind of resolution of all the administrative problems that The Who were having at the time. They decided to dismiss Shell Talmy and take on Kit Lambert, who sort of decided that he was going to, like Andrew Loog Oldham did with the Rolling Stones, that he was actually going to produce the Who's records himself. But finally, the situation sort of resolved itself with the first single, you know, under the new regime, Substitute, which was a considerable difference in style because it used acoustic guitars, a lot more subtle somehow. And I think in a way that sort of was a signpost for future musical direction, because I don't think they ever released any other singles that were quite as in your face as Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere or My Generation.
Substitute obviously features one of the best loved, best known guitar intros ever recorded. And interestingly enough, it's on an acoustic guitar. You know, although Townshend's known for his kind of wild energy, particularly on stage with his windmilling right arm, it's an acoustic guitar that heralds the beginning of the song, and it couldn't be more powerful if it was recorded with a Rickenbacker or an SG that he used to use through a wall of Marshalls. It's an amazingly bold, powerful statement.
On Substitute, Pete Townshend used a different technique. He could have basically played 3 chords like he did in the first singles, but he put a bit more compositional sense into it. Actually, what's interesting is later on in the 70s, the Sex Pistols covered it, and a lot of garage bands covered it, and they played it simplistically, which is just 3 chords, which I can show you. Pete Townshend didn't do that. What he did was he put a bit more compositional sense into it, and he actually split the riff up. So he played.
Townshend decided to use the word substitute in the title because he loved the way that Smokey Robinson sang the word substitute in the song Track of My Tears. And the whole song itself was almost entirely based on 19th Nervous Breakdown by the Stones, which Townshend himself admitted. So all these elements were going on, plus the fact Shell Talmy was no longer involved with The Who, they'd split with him. Kit Lambert, one of their co-managers, along with Chris Stamp, was now their producer, for better or for worse. Strangely enough, it was a good choice because he oversaw a transitional period, and partly perhaps because he was more manager than producer. It allowed Pete Townshend to take more control in the studio, which Shell Talmy as a producer first probably didn't allow as much. But you can hear in Substitute the beginnings of something a little different.
After a confusing flurry of singles released from the Decca-owned My Generation album, The Who's next original release came in the form of I'm a Boy.
Face.
I'm a Boy is one of the strangest songs Townshend ever wrote, or the Who ever performed. It's about a mother who decides to dress her son as a girl. And this kid basically saying, "Oi, I'm a boy, but my mother won't let me." And it's a frustrating thing, but while it's quite funny on one hand, on another level, I think there's an interesting thing about I'm a Boy. It's talking about someone who's forced by parents to do certain things. And I'm not talking about boys dressing as girls or anything of that nature. You're forced to go to university. You're forced to do certain things. And what it is a plea for individuality. It's basically saying, not stand up and blast back. It's basically saying, you have to be an individual. It's almost a plea to parents, saying, look, your kids have a right to be individual. Don't impose your morals, your rules, and the way you were brought up on your kids. Let them be themselves.
I'm a Boy equalled the success of My Generation, reaching #2 in the charts and confirming The Who as one of Britain's most popular acts. This popularity was demonstrated when the group were asked to front a Ready, Steady, Go special dedicated entirely to them. In conjunction with the show, the band decided to release the soundtrack from the programme as an EP under the name Ready, Steady, Who. However, things were not to go according to plan.
Although it was supposed to be the soundtrack of their famed television appearance, they'd been honoured with having a whole edition of Ready, Steady, Go devoted to the band, and which is now lost apparently, so you can't actually see it, which is a great tragedy. But the idea was that they would have the soundtrack from their television appearance on an EP.
The Ready, Steady, Who EP almost became an EP by mistake. It wasn't meant to be released in that fashion. In fact, it was put together for the Ready, Steady, Go programme, for which the Who were quite popular and very much locked up. It was an ITV equivalent to Top of the Pops, but a lot cooler in its own way, and because it didn't last as long as Top of the Pops, it never became uncool. However, it ended up being its own EP. Keith Moon comes to the surface here quite a lot.
The Ready, Steady, Who EP was very much Keith Moon's baby because he took lead vocal on 2 numbers. And there was Bucket Tea, which was an album track by Jan and Dean, and also Barbara Ann, which was a single by the Regents that had just been revived by the Beach Boys. And it was reflective of Keith's liking for surf music. I mean, when I say liking, I think that's rather a misnomer, because he didn't just sort of like surf music. I mean, it became more than a hobby, you know, collecting surf records. It became almost a religion. And as I say, Keith took the lead vocals on these. I mean, he wasn't the world's greatest singer, but I mean, there's a lot you can do with reverb and echo and all that sort of thing. And when Bucket Tea was released as a single in Sweden, it went straight to #1.
Tea, tea, bucket tea, bucket tea. Bucket, bucket tea, tea, bucket tea, bucket tea. Bucket, bucket tea, tea, bucket tea, bucket tea. Found her in a barn in Tennessee. Paid $5 for my bucket tea. Took me 3 years of sweat and blood to clean off all of that Tennessee mud. My bucket tea, bucket tea, bucket tea, bucket tea. My bucket tea, bucket tea, bucket tea, bucket tea.
The Who did it, and did it in a tremendous way that reflected the love of that music, but also had enough of The Who about it to make sure you weren't listening just to a band literally going note for note through the cover. So it was an unexpected and unplanned release that was a lucky unplanned release, because in a way it reflected the end of an era for The Who. It closed the book on an era.
Bucket tea, bucket tea.
As the new era opened, The Who began to concentrate on their second studio album, a quick one. The first single from the LP, Happy Jack, was to finally crack the so far elusive American market.
Happy Jack was inspired by what Pete Townshend as a kid saw on the beaches of the Isle of Man. These idiot men behaving like complete fools, and he decided to write a song and call it Happy Jack, because it's basically someone who's quite happy but is really an idiot deep down.
Maybe it's something that Pete rather admired. He could see he was tormented by so many ideas and influences and dreams and ambitions. Maybe he thought once in a while it might have been nice just to sit in the sand and do nothing at all. Kind of a charming thought, really.
And incredibly, it locked into an American psyche. Maybe everything had built up to this point, but it became something of a hit for the band in America.
Wasn't old, but he wasn't new. He lived in the sand at the island. The kids always sing, so they rode on his head.
When Happy Jack happened in America, The Who were supposed to do a Monkees-type series. And in fact, they even filmed one sequence when they were four robbers trying to break in somewhere to the theme of Happy Jack, and it all goes stupidly wrong. Unfortunately, because they were The Who, they never really had the wherewithal of the Monkees to turn their adventures into a TV series. The Monkees were easily manipulated, The Who weren't. The other interesting thing is right at the end of the song, you can hear Townshend going, "I saw ya." And what that refers to is Keith Moon was banned from the studio. They threw him out of the studio for reasons that remain with The Who. And he tried to sneak back in. And when Townshend was singing that line, he was actually saying, "I saw you trying to get back in." So there's a certain element of personal relationship in that particular song. But it did become a hit in America and almost established The Who as a credible band out in the States. Whereas over here, it was no more than just another single along the way for them.
The success of Happy Jack was followed by the release of a quick one in December 1966. The last song on the album was to become a precursor for a future musical direction for the band.
A Quick One was the band's second album. In many ways, it was the most satisfying of the early Who albums because it actually contained the seeds of what became later Tommy. They did their first rock opera with A Quick One While He's Away, which was most of the second half of the vinyl LP.
Her man's been gone for nigh on a year. He was due home yesterday, but he ain't here. Her man's been gone for nigh on a year. He was due home yesterday, but he ain't here.
It was an interesting experiment, and it worked, I think. They were encouraged by Kit Lambert. Of course, Kit had roots in opera, and he probably encouraged Pete to write something that was much more extensive than just a 3-minute song. It was the story of a woman who is looking for satisfaction from her lover, but whose lover has disappeared or has gone into hiding, and she has to make do with Ivor, the engine driver, who is a handy substitute, another substitute. So really, this little mini-opera, as Pete called it, was really all about the adventures of the woman and her lovers.
Why don't you stop your crying? Here comes Ivor, the dirty old sooty engine driver, to make you feel all right.
My name is Ivor, I'm an engine driver.
There's lots of interesting sound effects at one point where Ivor the engine driver arrives surrounded by clouds of steam which were provided by Keith Moon's cymbals. Something that nobody would dare do now on the record.
After the success of their second album, The Who once again changed record labels, this time to Lambert & Stamp's newly formed Track Records. The first single put out under this new regime was Pictures of Lily.
Pictures of Lily, Pete Townshend always said, was about, you know what, I want to have a hit single about masturbation. The song's about a dad who gives his kid dirty movies and dirty pictures, and about masturbation. And also, again, it's that parent-son relationship that comes in, which is a dad saying, look, I masturbated when I was your age, I know you want to, and you're probably doing it. Here's some stuff to help you along. Which, in a way, is a step further forward from I'm a Boy, which is about parents, or plea to parents to understand your kids. This was a dad understanding his kid.
Pictures of Lily is again using that mod idea of infiltration, you know, without anybody realising what you were doing. There was a few bands doing that at the time. Small Faces with Here Comes the Nice, which was all about taking speed. And Pictures of Lily, which is about masturbation. And this kid up in his bedroom, you know, and this is where he retreats to. You know, the world outside's horrible, but this is where he can retreat to and look at Pictures of Lily. And so to be writing a record about masturbation and getting it played on Radio 1, you've got to applaud him, you know. It's a fantastic achievement.
I used to wake up in the morning, I used to feel so bad. I got so sick of having sleepless nights, I went and told my dad. He said, son, now here's some little something, and stuck them on my wall. And now my nights ain't quite so lonely. In fact, I don't feel bad at all. I don't feel bad at all. Pictures of Lily made my life so wonderful.
Given the lyrical content of Pictures of Lily, which are pornography and masturbation in adolescent times, it's a really pretty melody. It's a great pop tune, and again, there's some fantastic playing on there. Mooney's drums, as always, are kind of a key feature of the tune. He pushes the whole thing along from the beginning. It's kind of a very soul-y, very kind of R&B kind of signature rhythm, which he draws on from time to time, and Pictures of Lily is a perfect example of him playing those beats.
Lily, oh Lily, pictures of Lily.
The group went back into the studio to work on their third LP, The Who Sell Out. It was a record that was to mark the group's early flirtations with concept recording.
Pirate radio was a huge factor in the success of many groups, because Radio 1, which had been established in 1967, had a playlist. If you got on the playlist, you're okay. If you didn't, then you were lost. And Radio Luxembourg and Radio Caroline were broadcasting the music that Radio 1 wouldn't play. So therefore, it was an essential tool. And when none other than Tony Benn banned pirate radio in this country, that tool was obviously lost. So Townshend was, you know, this was a big thing for many musicians.
By the time they came to The Who Sell Out, The Who came up with this concept of a pirate radio station, interspersing songs with adverts, some of which were real, like Heinz Beans, others of which they invented on the spot. But what The Who said was, now this is going to be a concept album, we're putting together our own pirate radio station. These are new songs from The Who, which are being aired on a pirate radio station, and interspersed in which we're going to have ads. And it's a great idea, and it works really well.
This was their finest pop art moment, because the idea behind the album was, one, The Who was selling out to radio and to commercial things, and two, that they were using pirate radio as a way into, you know, the album is a pirate radio, it's like a pirate radio station, and it starts off with an announcer and more music. And to me, the single that came off that, I Can See for Miles, was just, I think it preceded the album, but to me this was the apotheosis of The Who.
It's a kind of culmination of The Who's impact on the swinging 60s. After that, the going got very erratic.
I know you deceived me, now here's a surprise. you have, 'cause there's magic in my eyes. I can see for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Oh yeah. If you think that I don't know about the little tricks you play.
After all these singles which deal with identity, anger, frustration, it's like they've emerged out of it all. And they're so powerful now, They Can See from Mars. It's got fantastic riffs and guitars exploding all over the place. It's a fantastic record. And it's such a fantastic record that it nearly caused Townshend to quit music. Because that record, he only reached the top 20. I don't think it went top 10. And that killed Townshend because he knew, and I think anybody with an ear knows, that that was the pinnacle of this period that we've been talking about.
You took advantage of my trust in you when I was so far away. I saw you holding lots of other guys, and now you've got the nerve to say that you still want me. Well, that says maybe, but you gotta stand trial, because all the while...
Although I Can See for Miles can be seen as the final great release prior to Tommy, there were, however, to be 2 further singles before the end of the decade. The First Dogs in 1968 became The Who's first serious flop since I'm the Face, and also marked the lowest point in the band's finances. However, it was to be the single Magic Bus that finally drew the era to a close.
Every day, just to drive to my baby. Throw me 10 6 each day, 'cause I drive my baby every way.
Well, Too Much Magic Bus was probably one of the most heavily promoted of the Who singles. I still have my Magic Bus, which they gave to all journalists, which was like a little dinky toy. A little metal toy, which I actually prefer to the single. It has to be said. I never was a great fan of Magic Bus. I know it was a great show number. It was a good, simple tune to play on gigs.
Magic Bus is a much more jammed performance, loose feeling song than a lot of the stuff that the band had released earlier on as singles, which were fantastic nuggets of 2.5 minute kind of power pop that Townshend was so good at. But Magic Bus is nevertheless kind of an interesting return to their roots in some ways, as much as it's kind of back to some blues and R&B kind of roots for them.
As the 1960s came to a close, pop music began to change. The release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967 had shifted musical emphasis onto the album. The result was to be the end of the singles bands. It was the release of Tommy in May 1969 that would see The Who's final departure from their status in the singles world.
And suddenly the album became really, really important. And I think after the failure of I Can See for Miles, Townshend turned his attention to albums and to concept albums and to rock operas.
And I think there was a deliberate policy with Tommy to say, OK, we come to the end of the era. Dogs and Magic Bus finished off the era. There was a certain sense with Dogs of frustration and boredom with the singles market. There's a certain sense of frustration on Magic Bus with the singles market. It was almost as if we're trying to get away from this. We're knocking these out. This is the end of an era. Enjoy it for what it is. You ain't going to hear anything like this again from The Who. And then they made the conscious decision, right, that's it, end of the story. We're not going any further with our popism. We're not going any further with our singles. We're going to become a band who make albums.
And it cured all his problems. It broke The Who in America. It made them financially solvent. But above all, it ended an amazing era, an amazing run of singles, unparalleled, I think, in popular music in the 60s. A unique body of work when placed together, musically powerful, lyrically inventive, fantastic records.
Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, The Who would go on to have phenomenal success both at home and abroad. But it was in the 1960s, among their singles, that they truly revolutionised modern music.
They were makers of extraordinary singles. Regardless of the content of albums, the singles will always be remembered.
So I think personally that the Who's singles were some of the greatest and the most exciting of the whole of the 60s, ones that you still want to play now and listen to.
And I think you look back now and you realise what The Who did at the time. They were the third great cornerstone of British rock. Stones, the Beatles and The Who, without those three, rock as we know it wouldn't exist today. And that's probably the great reason why they are such an amazing band, because their influence is such that without them, we wouldn't have what we have today.